Welcome back to Dead to the Co. This is Chris. Another episode this week because it is a big week. In about 49 hours from the time of this recording, we will be live at Sphere to kick off the second residency. I'll be sharing show reviews of the first two shows on this podcast, so make sure that you stay in touch with the pod. Follow us on Instagram at Dead to the Co, of course. And I cannot wait. So that's going to be real exciting. But mostly hopped on today because we have some new content. We have a exclusive interview with Guitar World that John and Bob did. I'm not going to share the full article, of course, but I'll be talking about some points that I thought were interesting. They talked about Sphere, their gear, and the possibility of new music. So we'll save that for the end. So let's start by talking about Sphere. John was asked one thing that he learned from round one, and he mentioned that in terms of sensory experience, the audience can handle more. He says that I feel people want a little bit more of a thrill ride, so we'll push that just a little bit more this time. We'll see what that means for the visuals at Sphere. I was very impressed last year, but obviously excited about the prospect of being even more immersed this time around. I was there the first night last year, and John actually referenced that in this interview. He mentioned that the first time they did Liftoff, they played Mississippi Half Step, and the crowd was roaring, and that hyped them up so much that it gave them a hard time putting the song where they wanted to put it. And it sounds like it took them about the first weekend to become acclimated to the environment. The crowd's going to ooh and ah, and it's a little bit of a distraction, I take it. And it's hard to keep up that energy musically when the Sphere visuals are going all around you. And it's just interesting to see what the band has gone through and how they've had to adjust, because you don't always hear that side of things and you think they might have it down perfectly, but they're learning along the way as well. So really exciting to see what they do with the visuals this year. I'm sure they will be all over social media after the first weekend. So if you don't want those spoiled, best of luck to you. It's going to be hard to avoid that. In the interview, John and Bob were asked about their favorite moment from the first Sphere run, and Bob mentioned that when he's out there, he enters a different realm, so it's really hard for him to experience the show in any sort of similar way that the audience is experiencing it. He says he's out there, he's as out there as a fella gets, and he doesn't even notice the tech. And I find that really interesting because he mentions that the average guy on stage is in that realm to begin with. And in my very, very limited experience playing live music, that is very true. You kind of enter this trance to where everything in your peripheral kind of melts away and you're just focused on the song. And I can't imagine that in a venue like Sphere. I don't know how you can tune out what's around you, but if anyone is going to be locked into the music, it's Bob Weir. So I find that really interesting that he is actually in this trance when he's on stage and he's just in the music. And I think that is why he is so talented at what he does. And that takes probably a special certain skill to be able to do. Now, I'm not going to go into the tech side of the interview, the guitar tech. It's just not my specialty, not my forte. I don't know much about it, so I don't want to be speaking on something that I don't know too much about. But John did touch on his cabinets and the speakers that are mic'd up. He's playing through his amps, and it's going into the speakers that are actually mic'd up and into the loading dock of the Sphere. So if you're walking along the loading dock of the Sphere during the show, you'll hear John's guitar because it's actually coming out of those speakers that are mic'd up, and they're dressed up like mini studio rooms. I think mostly for sound design, but also it's a cool aesthetic. So if you haven't seen, or if you want to learn more about that, check out John's Instagram. He posted about those. Again, I'm not like super well informed on what any of this means, but that is something that is interesting that was talked about more in this interview. So definitely, read this interview if that's something that you're interested in learning more about. Bob does talk about how he switched to a Strat, and he's using a 64 Stratocaster, which is pretty neat. And then John also talks about how he is using the dead spec about 90% of the show, and he talks about how they've had to make enhancements to the guitar to match Jerry's tone. Well, probably not to match the tone, but to resemble the tone. And he talks about the other guitars that he uses as well and the purpose for using those. John was also asked about how he's evolved from 2015, 2016 to now. And he mentioned that the first thing that has changed is he's been able to better understand the music in terms of the arrangement. Another thing he mentioned was the balance of his guitar styles and how when a song is a cover, he has a little more freedom to play a little bit more like Jimi Hendrix, because the main contributor to that song isn't Jerry Garcia. And regarding him emulating Jerry's playing style, he mentions how the way Jerry plays in 69 is different from 74. 74 is different from 81. So even that, his guitar playing, he says that he's learned how to do his best, and that the constant is that every tour he's done from 2015 to now is the best he could have done in that moment. And it was only after each tour he would get back in his car, listen to more Dead recordings, and realize he hadn't come close. And he says that the only way to realize that you hadn't come close is to have grown somewhere along the line when you realize you know now better. So it wasn't until the final tour in 23 that, and even now I take it, each time he's just trying to get it right and based on everything that he has learned previously. And I just find that inspiring as, one, a guitar player, and then secondly, just as a person. I mean, to give yourself the freedom to grow. You look back, you learn, and you get better. And there's no way you can get to where you want to be without just trying along the line. You have to just dive in and put yourself out there. And I think that's kind of what he's doing here when he's playing the music. You know, it was a big undertaking to step into Dead & Company out of the pop realm that he was kind of in. Obviously, he's always been an incredible guitarist, so I think everyone knew he had it in him, but it was a matter of whether or not it was going to work. And obviously it's worked, and it's been incredibly successful. And that wouldn't have happened if he didn't put himself out there in 2015, even if he didn't fully understand the arrangements the way he does now. So I find that to be really interesting. Bob says that in the past 10 years, he's changed, but he always changes, and that every day when he wakes up, it changes. And if you add all those mornings together, you become a different person. So I find that very quintessential Bob answer. John says that over the years, the one thing he has learned from Bob is to let it breathe, and that's changed his playing a lot. They have a very telepathic relationship. They know where each other stand, and they don't even have to talk about it. And Bob says that he learned from John not to sweat the small stuff, and that they're both constantly evolving, and they make room, make allowances, develop. And I find that to be a really good relationship that they have. And that's the reason, a main reason why Dead & Company works so well, is the relationship between John and Bob and their ability to communicate with each other on stage. I think the entire band communicates really well. Jeff and John, Mickey and Billy, of course, and now Mickey and Jay, Bob and Oteil and John. They all have a really good rhythm with each other, and I think that is really what makes Dead & Company special. They are more than just a legacy band. I think that they're truly a band. They're not the Grateful Dead. They won't ever be the Grateful Dead, but that's okay. They're doing, again, the best that they can in this current moment to carry the torch forward, and I think they've done an incredible job with that. Now, they also talked about their first time playing together on television and what that experience was like. I won't go into that because I think a lot of us have heard that story many times. If you haven't, definitely check out the Guitar World article. Now, the big news is whether or not they would be interested in going into the studio and recording new material or revisiting songs that were only played on stage by the Grateful Dead. Is that a possibility? And Bob's answer was kind of a resounding yes. He says it's something that he would love to do. He's got the best guys on it. And, Mayer said that if it's something that Bobby and Billy and Mickey want to do, then he would do it. And who's him to say no? So if it's something that naturally came along and felt like the next evolution of the band and the music, he would be in. So I find that really exciting. Now, I think that's a very polarizing subject matter, whether or not you would want studio recordings from Dead & Company. And let's face it, Grateful Dead weren't ever really known for their studio recordings anyways. I would welcome it. I would find it to be really fun and interesting and a cool development. Because why not? In my opinion, it doesn't take anything away from the Grateful Dead or what Dead and Company has done over the past 10 years. You might have a different opinion, and that's fine. But to me, more is more, and more content is more exciting as a fan of the band and the people in it. So I would definitely welcome that, but totally understand if others might not feel the same way. It's clearly a polarizing subject. And if I'm being completely honest, I think the riskiest thing they could do is record new music. I don't see that happening, but it is something that could happen down the line, whether or not it's old Grateful Dead songs that they're recording or new stuff. I would welcome it, but I think it would be quite controversial. Now, another potentially controversial piece from this interview is Bob mentioned if there was anything else that Dead & Company were going to do, he would like to take it overseas. And the reason I think it's controversial is because they've done their final tour, quote unquote, but they could play a few shows in Europe, obviously honoring Grateful Dead's impact in Europe from their European tours. Those were some incredible shows. It would be really neat to have Dead & Company take an adventure out into Europe and see those shows. I don't think I'd see them personally live, but listen to the recordings or watch them. I think that it would be worth doing. I like that Bob touched on these are quintessentially American music, American songs that they're performing and playing. A lot of it is traditional, it's folky, and it would be cool to bring that to Europe and give people in those places an opportunity to see Dead & Company live. Now that's it for today. I just wanted to share some interesting tidbits that I found from that Guitar World article for those that don't have access to the piece. Definitely read the full article. I intentionally wasn't relaying everything that I read, but I did want to share the major highlights that I saw. I hope you all tune back in later this week for the first 2 shows in Vegas. Can't wait to share that experience with everybody. Thank you for listening to Dead to the Co. Ian and I greatly appreciate it. We are trying to grow this podcasting community, and we would love to have you coming back. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time on Dead to the Co.